Good morning again. This is a basic review video for Chapter 2, the Founding and the Constitution. There are about 4, 5, 6 questions that we can answer through some of the ideas that are listed on this worksheet displayed behind me. There are your 5 sectors that had stakes in colonial politics. New England merchants and Southern planters are the 2 main groups, and they come at things from a pretty much different point of view. The New England Puritans were the main influence in that region of what becomes the United States, whereas Southern planters come from a more individualistic and entrepreneurial and more romantic background. Another area of a sector that has a stake in colonial politics are the Royalists or Loyalists, sometimes called the Tories. Another group is small merchants or shopkeepers, and the last one are the small farmers. What all the first 2 groups will be successful in doing is convincing number 4 and 5 to back them. The only group that's going to support Britain out of these 5 are the Tories. The Boston Tea Party was a major event in American history that led to the Revolution. You could call this a terrorist act, actually. They were protesting England allowing the East India Company to dump their tea on the American market. They had a surplus. Lord North in the Parliament had friends in the East India Company. They convinced him to take this tea and sell it in the American colonies. It was actually a good deal for consumers because this East India tea was less costly than the tea that was being sold by Americans. This undercut many of those involved in smuggling operations with the Caribbean where tea was being made, and this upset them because it's cutting into their profits. The Declaration used a lot of Lockean principles of life, liberty, and he changed property to the pursuit of happiness. Then most of the rest of the Declaration of Independence is a list of massive grievances against King George III. The Revolutionary War happens during those years. We talked earlier about natural rights, which came from John Locke. You should be familiar with those ideas already. Eventually, the revolution will be won. The British surrender at Yorktown in 1781. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, ends the revolution. And the first official government will be the Articles of Confederation during those years from 1781 through 88. And the Articles had a number of problems, ladies and gentlemen. There is no chief executive. There is no national currency. Each state is just as powerful as the next state. States were taxing one another's goods coming into their state. There is no tariff on goods coming in from foreign countries. And eventually, by 1788, there is a famous rebellion in Massachusetts led by Daniel Shays, who was a Revolutionary War vet. He and his followers were attempting to prevent the seizure of indebted farmers' property. Out of this event, which was suppressed fairly bloodlessly, not a lot of people were killed in the suppression, but it came to symbolize the weakness of the Articles of Confederation, and it convinced many elites that it was time to revise the Articles, which led to a number of meetings in 1787 and 88. They met once in Annapolis. They couldn't come to any sort of agreements there. They agreed to meet later, and they did in Philadelphia in 1787. And during the Constitutional Convention, they met behind closed doors. They discussed nothing that went on behind those closed doors with anyone. And what they decided to do was to scrap the Articles of Confederation. And who gave them the right to do this? Nobody. Again, these are the same elite white property owners that had come to see British interference in their affairs as counterproductive, and most of all costly. They decided to get rid of the Articles. The only reason we know any of this is because James Madison kept a diary of the proceedings, and it is the only written record of what went on at the Constitutional Convention. Sometimes for that reason, James Madison is called the father of the Constitution. During the convention, there are a number of proposals that were made. There were different plans of representation that were presented. There was a New Jersey plan by William Patterson that basically wanted to keep much of the article system in place, where each state is equal. Each state has the same representation. This was opposed by some of the larger states like Virginia. The Virginia plan by Edmund Randolph proposed that representation be based on population. And out of this came compromises. The first of which, the Connecticut Compromise, sometimes called the Great Compromise, created bicameral or the two-house government that we have today. The House of Representatives is based on population. The greater the population, the more representation you're going to have. And the Senate, which is based on equality, each state has 2 senators. Another compromise was the 3/5 Compromise, which appeased the South. They wanted to include their slave populations in their totals for representation in the House of Representatives. The compromise was, for every 5 slaves, 3 will count towards representation. The key articles in the Constitution, in my opinion, Article 1, in the beginning, the legislative branch, the Congress, is the most powerful part of the United States government. Article 4, which creates national unity. All the states now have to respect the rules and laws of the other states. This was something that was not done under the Articles. Article 7 talks about how the Constitution can be amended. Article 6 is also important. It talks about the Constitution being the supreme law of the land. And this is ratified by the different states. So from the beginning, it is there that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Not the states, but the Constitution itself, because it's based on the people. The people, in theory, are the foundation of the American Republic. The Federalist Papers during the ratification period in 1788 were written by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and 3 of them by John Jay from New York. Hamilton and Jay are both New Yorkers. Jay took ill and he only wrote 3 of these. The majority of the essays under the pseudonym Publius. The Anti-Federalists also wrote essays under the pseudonym Brutus. They were opposed to the ratification of this new Constitution. The Federalist Papers supported it. The Anti-Federalists did not. And those are the 2 basic sides in the fight for ramification, Federalists and Anti-Federalists. 2 important Federalist Papers were number 10, where Madison's pluralist theory is discussed, and this implies a move towards more democracy. How can you control the problem of tyranny of the majority? Is that you keep expanding. Expand the sphere and you keep taking in greater and greater numbers of groups, making it less likely that these groups can combine and oppress the wishes of the citizens. Number 51 talks about how within government tyranny can be prevented. And the basic idea is ambition must be made to counter ambition. Any representative or any person that's serving in government is a human being who probably has something on the ball. He has desires. He has skills. And that's okay. Use that human nature for the better good of the government. And that's where the idea of checks and balances and separation of power comes in. Each branch, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, has checks on the other branches of government, which makes them less likely to become too powerful and then oppressing the needs and desires of the other branches and implicitly the needs of the people in the republic. One of the ways that the Anti-Federalists were assuaged from their concerns about a too powerful national government. After all, that's what the revolution was about. We fought a war to get rid of this all-powerful national government, this government from the top down under King George III. Now we're going to go back to that system. Madison, in one of the last Federalist papers, talked about how when he gets into the House of Representatives, he will immediately propose amendments, or what we know today as the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, your civil liberties, your protections against the national government. At the beginning, it is the national government only that the Bill of Rights applies to. Basically, then, the last question, the basic procedure for constitutional amendment. For our purposes, you need 2/3 of Congress to propose an amendment, and then you need 3/4 of the states to ratify. The Constitutional Convention method has only been used once. There are 4 procedures, but only 2 of them have ever been used, and the convention method was only used to repeal prohibition. The 2/3, 3/4 fraction are the things to remember for this course, and that's been used 26 out of 27 times. And that's it for this particular chapter.